difficulties. This is why we need Caitlin's assistance. So I'm going to just step back 1 second and state again that the relationship of humans with hemp and with our companion and production animals goes back millennia. It was used not only for construction materials, a lot of pottery, making boats, which is a huge component of how we were able to travel between continents, but then also significant use as food and plant-based medicine. So that relationship goes back millennia, but we can also trace it on every continent around the world. And so I tried to really hone in on the American relationship for our conversation today. And you can see that, through the 1700s, we had quite an intimate relationship where it was a requirement for farmers to actually grow hemp. The Declaration of Independence is written on hemp paper. And even in the early 1900s, the use of hemp as animal feed was well documented, not only in advertisements, but then also in publications around crop farming. And you can see that all the way up until 1908, the Lancaster publication. And then there's also a publication from a Kentucky Department of Agriculture person, expert in crop production, that was entered into Congress. So you can see throughout history, there's been a lot of different emphasis on hemp and its uses, even into the war, where farmers were again required to grow hemp so that we had the opportunity to make rope and fiber here on American soil. It wasn't until Prohibition began, and this actually happened in 1937. So Prohibition was lifted during the war for that Hemp for Victory program, and then immediately after the war ended, it was put back in place. So this continued and was actually reinforced in 1970 when the Controlled Substances Act made hemp an illegal Schedule I drug. And for those of you that are familiar, Schedule I drugs include things like cocaine or methamphetamines. So that was clearly an overreach for the use of what had been food and fiber for millennia. You can see that there has been a number of legal lawsuits to try and loosen up the restrictions, but it really was not until the 2014 Farm Bill allowed for research institutions to start pilot hemp programs. At the same time, and I'm here in Colorado, so we also began a pilot program in 2014 that led to the 2017 Stakeholder Study Group. That was actually legislated and paid through fiscal appropriation by our legislature here in Colorado. And that stakeholder group was set to investigate what the opportunities were and what the pathway to gaining legal approval for hemp as animal feed actually looked like. And it was that stakeholder group that led to the formation of the coalition in 2018. And that's because when the stakeholder group ended, they had a clear pathway and next steps to actually gain legal approval. But the government agency, the Colorado Department of Agriculture, was not the appropriate entity to begin to move that process forward. And so that's how the Hemp Feed Coalition was formed. And then in 2018, with the passage of the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018, then we legalized hemp with the current definition. And for those of you that are not familiar, the current definition is a 0.3% THC threshold. So anything below that 0.3% THC is going to be considered hemp. Anything above that is considered a non-compliant material, but the definition of marijuana begins at 1% THC. So a lot of where we find ourselves in the legalization of hemp and cannabis products is this amazing gray area. And I wanted to use that inference of, what is 0.3 to less than 1% of a THC component in a cannabis plant. And that is a gray area for us legally. A lot of states are trying to figure that out. But that is a really good way to think about the majority of hemp regulation and the legal framework around hemp, is that there is a lot of gray area. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about was to specifically look at hemp as an animal feed. And you can see the advertisement that I referenced in the first timeline. This was found in the Lancaster Intelligencer Journal in 1908. And Fred Plantz was a really well-known feed mill operator that was in Lancaster and serviced probably hundreds of acres of crops in at least 100 farmers that all worked through that. And also, of course, created the formulations for a lot of the livestock and animals that were there. And of course, at that time, horses were a valuable commodity. And most folks, especially if they were farming, would not have been able to function without their horses being well maintained and healthy. So the reference that I made earlier about the publication that highlighted hemp as an agricultural crop in the United States was published in 1843 and entered into the Library of Congress that same year. The real conundrum here is that while the United States has had a struggle in this real gray area has been an issue for us with the legal and regulatory approval process, the rest of the world really never stopped eating or feeding hemp to their animals. So unfortunately, while we're trying to get regulatory approval, most of the rest of the world is happily feeding hemp and is not concerned if their horses are foraging and there's hemp volunteers in their pastures. But the background of the legal process, and Bill's going to go into this in great detail. My goal here is to provide you with a little bit of an overview, is that there were 3 GRAS applications that were submitted to FDA, and GRAS is generally regarded as safe. This is not an approval of those ingredients, but rather the manufacturer puts forth data that shows that there's not been any adverse reactions to the consumption of those ingredients. And the reason it's not considered approval is because their response is a no objection. In no way does this actually say approval. It simply implies that they don't object and do not have any concerns or additional questions when considering those ingredients as safe for human consumption because of historical use. That happened in 2018. And what's shocking for me is that, again, the rest of the world is happily eating it. And it was just 2 years ago that we recognized these materials as being safe for human consumption. And that was hemp seed oil, hemp hearts, and hemp protein powder. So for an idea of the economic opportunity that we're talking about for hemp foods, you can see in 2017, there was 749 metric tons of hemp seed oil and 1,475 metric tons of hemp seed cake imported into the United States in order to meet consumer demand. And that is the numbers that we associate with human food, not necessarily with animal feed, although I suspect that there were products on the market that were enjoying those imports as well. And then FDA did recognize that seed byproducts represent an opportunity for low-cost animal nutrition because of its nutritional content, and also because seeds typically contain only trace amounts of cannabinoids, including CBD or THC. And this is important because this is one of the pathways that was identified through the stakeholder group, was that the FDA and the CVM, Center for Veterinary Medicine, who controls animal feed, is much more open to the idea of moving forward with with grain and grain byproducts, because of this recognition that cannabinoids are not above trace amounts in seed. And when we're talking about the production of grain and grain products, we generally consider cannabinoids to be a contaminant, simply because if you're getting measurable amounts of those cannabinoids in a grain or grain byproduct, it is an indicator that the seed was not cleaned of leaf, flower, or other plant detritus, and that was processed with that grain. So that has been a much easier pathway to move forward in conversations with FDA CVM about legalizing hemp grain and grain byproducts for animal consumption. And I want to emphasize first. So this is a relationship that we're building, and we're going to start with the products that they're most comfortable with. And then as we can build research and get more information and really understand how to present that to the FDA CVM, we're definitely looking to include other products. A lot of people are very interested in pulp material. We'll get into that a little bit later if we get some time. The big change for the Hemp Feed Coalition happened in May 2019, and this is going to be important when we talk about the regulatory pathways. But there's two pathways in the American Association of Feed Control Officials prints an approved ingredient list in their manual every single year. And that was not an opportunity for the industry when the Hemp Feed Coalition was born and when the stakeholder group finalized their recommendations. At the time when we were formed, the only opportunity to pursue ingredient approval was through a feed additive petition that goes directly to FDA CVM and requires a manufacturer and a feed formulator to be the submitter. As an industry group, the Hemp Feed Coalition did not meet that criteria. And so we were not able to move forward with any submissions as an industry organization until AFCO came out with a public statement in May 2019, encouraging the industry to move forward with a submission. At that point, literally the very next day, I began working on our first new ingredient definition for submission to AFCO. We are still working on that, and we intend to submit in August, and that will be for hemp seed meal and cake for chickens, broilers, and egg layers. So that's very exciting. And then the last thing to mention is that we do work closely with the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance and making sure that we have opportunities to trade back and forth our northern border. And they recently did approve hemp products for dogs, cats, and companion horses just last year around the same time that the AFCO allowed industry organizations to submit. So the next thing for me to go over is those steps to submission. So as I mentioned, we're an industry organization, so we really were just recently allowed the opportunity to do that new ingredient definition. And I thought that it may be helpful for you guys to see what the steps look like in order to complete a submission, to help explain why it has taken this much time, and also to lay the foundation and groundwork for the rest of our conversation today. So the first step is to do a literature review on the feed ingredient and clinical feed trials specific to the target species in the animal category. So when we think of animal category, that would be the difference between a performance horse, a maintenance diet, or a pregnant and lactating mare, for example. And I do believe Dr. Phillips will get into that in much greater detail. We also have to talk about the intended purpose. Is this a protein supplement? And we have to be highly focused on nutritional composition and nutritional potential ingredient use. That is the focus of the Hemp Feed Coalition, is on the nutritional side. Bill Bookout and the National Animal Supplements Council is focused on the supplement side. And this is a big reason why we're working together, is because we need both sides of that equation to really gain federal approval. So the next step is then to define the ingredient. And through the FDA CVM, we have some parameters that we have to meet. One of those is that it must be American grown, American processed, and then American conducted clinical trials. Now, I'm sure that you guys can automatically begin to question how we're going to be able to do that when we've literally been able to get access to this plant legally in 2018. And this is one of the biggest reasons that we're having this call today, is to introduce you to this process and to also ask for your engagement to help us do the data collection so that we can meet the threshold of information that we can submit to the FDA CVM. So this is a really critical moment in the hemp industry where data is the thing that's really preventing us from moving forward as quickly as we could. The next step is to define the manufacturing process, putting in good quality controls, making sure that the product is consistent so that an approved ingredient looks the same no matter where you buy it from or how it's put into the formula of the product that you're getting. The next thing is to gather this nutritional data so that we can set what an approved ingredient should look like. So this is how much crude fat, how much crude protein, what is the fiber content, what's the minerals, and then this also includes analysis on a 5 to 7 non-consecutive lot sample. So the broad ingredient definition is something that we need help in getting certificates of analysis from hemp grown across the United States so that we can make sure that we cover and include as much variation or specific variation that falls within those parameters, as well as these 5 to 7 non-consecutive lot samples that will be measured very discreetly to look at vitamin, minerals, anti-nutritional components. So those are things that may affect different categories of animals differently. Then the actual composition of amino acids, fatty acids, and then fiber composition as it applies to the specific target animal that we're intending to feed it to. The next step is to identify a principal investigator who can work with us towards the submission of not only the clinical feed trials, but then can help to collect the data and work with our consultants that are veterinary toxicology experts to complete the application and to respond to any inquiries that the FDA CVM may have. So once we identify that principal investigator, then and one of the agreements is that that individual or that agency agrees to submit protocols and methods for their study to FDA CVM for pre-approval. While this may slow the process and it may add expense at the front of the process, the goal is to streamline the research that we're doing and to also make sure that we don't miss a critical issue that the FDA CVM is going to want answered, thereby forcing us to repeat aspects of the study. So in the long term, this should save us both time and money. Once the approval is received from FDA CVM, then we go through the clinical feed trial, we gather data, we prepare the submission, and because we're industry, then we present that new ingredient definition to AFCO directly. We currently have an investigator from AFCO who's been assigned to look at our grain and grain byproducts. Once they sign off on it, it then goes to FDA CVM for their approval. And our goal is really to tell the story of the ingredient and make a case for its approval based on safety and efficacy for its intended purposes for that specific animal. So it's quite a long process, and my thanks to Dr. Phillips for being our principal investigator and really partnering with us to make this happen. So this is, I know it's a really busy infograph, and I worked so hard to try and make this as simple as possible. And I think the fact that I worked that hard to try and make it as simple as possible and it's still really complex just speaks to the process in and of itself. So the new ingredient definition that you see on the left side of your screen, that's through the AFCO process. The right side is the feed additive petition. That's the FDA CVM process. Now, even if we submit to AFCO, it does eventually go to FDA CVM, and you can see that there's an approval bubble there. A couple of things that I want to point out is that for companion animals, we are not beholden to prove the safety of the byproduct. And by that, I mean, because we're not consuming our horses, we don't have to look at the product that it is resulted from the feeding of hemp to the animal. For example, if we were looking at chickens, specifically laying hens, then not only would the ingredient have to be approved for the specific species in its category, but then we would have to look at the byproduct itself. And whenever there's a byproduct, it automatically kicks it over to a feed additive petition, is necessitated because of that byproduct. So there's some subtle differences between how you determine if it's a new ingredient definition versus a feed additive petition. But hopefully this gives you guys a little bit of an opportunity to see the complexity, but also, what the pathway is to that approval. And the other thing I want to mention in looking at this infograph is that there's a number of times where the submission goes to the agency for them to consider and review, and they can kick it back to the submitter and the principal investigators for additional data collection and studies. So again, that's something that we're trying to avoid with the pre-approval process, and by being in direct communication with AFCO and FDA CVM as we move through this process. So right now, what I would like to do is hand this over to Bill Bookout to take forward and really dive into the regulatory side of things. And Bill and I met actually on the stakeholder group that was hosted here in Colorado. So we have been working on this issue now for 4 years, I believe, Bill. It's been a while. And he founded the National Animal Supplements Council to really make sure that someone was monitoring and providing information to the animal industries about supplements. He's been fantastic to work with. And again, the Hemp Feed Coalition is focused on the nutritional side, whereas the National Animal Supplements Council is going to be focused on that supplement side. So, Bill, I'm excited to have you here today. And are you ready to carry it away?
I am.
Excellent.
Thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate. For those of you on the other end of the computers and screens, technology is great when it works. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'll try to be fairly brief in my comments, but my contact information is at the end, and I'll make the presentation available to you, Hunter, and you can communicate that to whomever is interested. So the topics I'm going to try to touch on in the brief time that I have is the 2018 Agricultural Improvement Act, known as the Farm Bill, what it did do, what it didn't do, who regulates the products and what regulatory agencies are involved, what's being done, as Hunter talked about, and Dr. Phillips will also elaborate on further, to address the use of hemp. And just a point of clarification, people often ask about hemp, but they're really asking about CBD. So I'll try to separate those, and again, we'll be available for questions. So what's being done, what you can do to help, and what I think are some of the greatest risks to the industry, and also things that you can watch out for. So there's some confusion in definitions and terms. So let me just reiterate that. Hunter touched on it somewhat. Marijuana is cannabis sativa L with a THC content of 0.3% or greater. Hemp is cannabis sativa L with a THC content of less than 0.3%. So same plant. It's just a variation of the concentration of THC, which is the psychotropic component of the hemp plant. And it's one of many constituents involved, as is CBD or cannabidiol. Cannabidiol, CBD, is one constituent of the hemp extract, or an extract from the hemp plant, and it can contain various compounds. I think there's over 80, maybe over 100 compounds of cannabinoids, terpenes, and other things. And CBD is a naturally occurring constituent of hemp. The greatest concentrations of cannabinoids occur in the flowering tops and resins of the plant. And one of the things the Farm Bill did specifically do was to specifically highlight in verbiage and segment out the ability to utilize parts of the plant. Okay. So regulatory authority. Who regulates cannabis, which includes hemp, CBD, or cannabis derivatives? So the Food and Drug Administration Center for Veterinary Medicine is the division of FDA that has regulatory oversight and authority for all food and drugs. That's why they're called the Food and Drug Administration. State regulatory agencies through the Department of Agriculture, or it could be some other agency in the state, like a state chemist's office. So in Indiana, Kentucky, Texas, for example, to cite three, their regulatory authority for animal food and agricultural oversight is through the state chemist's office, but usually it's through one of those two, the Department of Agriculture or the state chemist's office. DEA comes into play. DEA, I say maybe. Why is that? Because it depends on the THC concentration. So if the THC concentration is 0.3% or less, then DEA is removed from that equation. As Hunter said, formerly this was a Schedule 1 substance, but the Farm Bill specifically carved that out. And so if the THC concentration is less than 0.3%, then DEA is no longer involved. FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, what's the FTC worried about? Or what do they review? They review claims and benefits. So are they truthful and substantiated? They're concerned about things that are not false and misleading to the consumers. So if somebody says a particular product or substance has a benefit, whatever that is that truthful, not false and misleading, and can you back that up scientifically? So NASC also we're a nonprofit association. We're the largest trade association in the world, representing companies that sell products for dogs, cats, and horses that are similar to human dietary supplements. And we work very cooperatively with FDA, with AFCO, and state regulatory agencies to bring a system of responsible conduct to the industry, which includes labeling, claims, adverse event reporting, helping facilitate pathways to approval. So it's a very comprehensive self-regulatory program. And so self-regulation does not mean unregulated, okay? So the point I want to illustrate from this slide is a lot of people think these products, and I hear sometimes, this is an unregulated industry. That's not true. It is a regulated industry for sure. Enforcement varies, and I'll talk about that. So what did the Farm Bill do and what did it not do? The Farm Bill legalized the growing of hemp as an agricultural crop. Okay, it did not legalize articles of commerce, meaning products. Okay, so I hear some people say, and there's a misconception, that the Farm Bill legalized hemp products. That's not so. The Farm Bill legalized the growing and the oversight of the agricultural commodity. It did not legalize a product for some specific benefit, like a nutritional benefit. So if you had a product that was, a great source of protein or fiber, or you had CBD that may help have a calming effect, those are products. So that's different, all right? Regulatory oversight, again, DEA is removed if the THC concentration is 0.3%, but FDA does have the authority to regulate both food and drugs. I've heard it said, and I was at a seminar one time at a major meeting, and I heard a presenter say, FDA does not have the authority to regulate hemp or CBD products. That's absolutely not true. They do have the authority to regulate these types of products. So it really didn't change anything on the animal food side, including all species of animals. And currently, the status is hemp or any derivatives are considered unapproved ingredients for use in animal food. So it's not approved. Dr. Phillips is going to talk more about that as far as the nutritional benefits, and that's Hunter. And her objective is to help facilitate the approval process. So ingredient approval, there's really a number of pathways. Hunter talked about two of them. There's really four. So you can, if you use anything in an animal feed, so just a definition of terminology. When you look at federal law under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, FDA says food or drink for man or other animals. Feed is typically a state term, but for our purposes, they're synonymous. Food and feed, it's the same thing, all right? So it's nutritionally beneficial product. So you can have approved food additive, as Hunter talked about, generally recognized as safe. The reason I put that up there is, and Hunter touched on this as well, there are some GRAS approvals generally recognized as safe on the human side, but GRAS for humans does not mean GRAS for animals. So to have a GRAS approval for animals, it has to be specifically for animals and more specifically for the target species, right? You can have an AFCO ingredient, and Hunter talked about that, or you can have a common and usual name. Apples. If you look up apples in the AFCO official publication, or carrots, or lettuce, or peas, you won't find that. Those are common and usual foods, okay? So those are the 4 pathways. The ingredient has to meet one of these to be approved, or it's considered an unapproved ingredient for use in animal food, and the product could potentially be adulterated. So of the available pathways, how does that matter for hemp, cannabis, CBD, or any cannabis derivative for use in animal feed? There's the 4 choices. There's the answer. None of them. The Farm Bill changed nothing as far as hemp for use in products. So Hunter's talked about submitting a food additive petition or an AFCO feed ingredient definition that will help, or that will actually solve the problem for a specific species for a nutritional benefit. Okay, so what does this mean? So again, I said a lot of people ask about hemp, but they're really asking about CBD. Okay, so I just want to touch on CBD, and I've also given testimony at FDA's public hearing on 31 May in 2019, and as Hunter said, I've been on the front end of this issue for about 4 years. Hunter, by the way, in dog years, that's almost 30 years that we've been doing this. So just FYI. So hemp is an approved agricultural commodity, and the states are given the responsibility of how the product should be regulated. There is an approved drug containing a CBD derivative, Epidiolex, that was approved in June 2019 for seizures in kids. Products, so people ask, okay, so I see all these products out there. Why is that? Right? They're marketed under enforcement discretion. So does it mean they're legal or approved? It does not. It means they are marketed at risk. Now, you can market a product at risk, provided the company acts responsibly, and I'll talk more about that. So as far as approvals, you have to substantiate the benefit. There's a feed additive petition in progress for hemp seed oil that would allow approval as an essential fatty acid contributor for dogs and cats. Other species in the future, and that is Hunter's focus, as a fiber source, protein source. So specifically for CBD, in my opinion, CBD will never be approved for use in food. There's simply no nutritional basis or scientific substantiation to support CBD as being a nutritionally beneficial ingredient. There's all kinds of data out there that Hunter's in the process of putting together, and so are others, about supporting the nutritional benefit. So approval all starts with and ends with, what is the intended benefit? So to have a nutritionally approved ingredient, you have to be nutritionally beneficial. Essential fatty acid, protein, fat, fiber, a nutritional benefit. So if you have an ingredient like CBD, or for a calming purpose, that's not a nutritional benefit. Okay. So what has FDA said? There's a lot of words on this slide, and I'll give you the slide so you don't have to worry about taking it, and it's all public information anyway, and I have references at the end so you can click on it, you can read, the exact topics. So FDA has been very consistent in their opinions and what they've published, both with Commissioner Gottlieb as well as Commissioner Hahn, although Commissioner Hahn has given an indication that they know that they're going to have to find a way to deal with these substances because they're in the marketplace and they're very popular. So CBD, or FDA has said that to introduce food containing CBD, it's not okay with them in any human food or animal food. They caution against companies making diagnose, prevent, treat, or cure claims. So if you mention a disease, you see a company mentioning a disease, either overt or implied, that's a bad thing, and FDA can issue a warning letter, and that's not a happy thing to have happen. So the generally recognized as safe, there are 3 GRAS pathways that FDA had not had no questions letters about. So, but that's only on the human side, and it doesn't do anything for the animal side. So this quote comes right from, because I talk to FDA all the time, people in CVM, and this comes straight from someone in the agency whose name I won't mention, but FDA is not aware of any basis to conclude that CBD is grass among qualified experts for its use in human or animal food. And I get it. The primary purpose of this webinar is to talk about approval for hemp as a nutritionally beneficial ingredient. But again, I put this out there because a lot of people ask about hemp when they're really meaning CBD. We had a conference call yesterday that there was a veterinarian on the call that was talking about CBD and purposes that are beneficial non-nutritionally. So, quote from the agency: for the agency to state this publicly is very significant. Okay. So, what are FDA's concerns? The number one concern of a regulatory agency, no matter who they are, is always safety. Their job, first and foremost, is to protect the safety of man and other animals. So man and animals, it's always safety. Also concerns are manufacturing and quality. So CGMPs, meaning process control. You do the same thing the same way every single time and get the same outcome. So you produce a consistent quality product. And so good manufacturing practices, written quality manuals, that's what they do. Having systems for maintaining vigilance post-marketing. No matter how robust any clinical trial or feeding trial is, you can never find everything that's going to happen when you introduce a product into mass commerce. So tracking and trending adverse events in case something unforeseen comes up. I'll give you an example. The melamine issue that happened in pet food in 2007 and 2008, there were not robust adverse event reporting systems and systems of vigilance in place. And so they were behind the curve on identifying the melamine issue, which probably for a lot of people on the call, you remember when that happened. Companies making claims, diagnose, prevent, treat, cure, or mitigate disease, either overtly stated or implied. Let me give you an example of each. Overt is our product helps dogs with cancer, horses with colic. Or allergies. Allergies are drug claims. Implied claim would be hemp has been in use for many millennia and has been shown to have this benefit. Your product has hemp in it or CBD, that's an implied claim. You may not overtly state your product does this, but either one are considered claims that you are responsible for in your company. I said we were regulated at a couple different levels, the state level and the federal level. California Department of Agriculture, CDFA, and this is a quote from, and I've got the link on this so you can go right to CDFA's website and get the announcement. So it says, California does have a remedy law, and horses are considered livestock in California, and their remedy law has all livestock. So it says all hemp and hemp-derived ingredients or cannabis-derived ingredients may not be used in commercial feed or livestock drug products, as these ingredients are unapproved for livestock per the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and subsequently, they have not been approved for use in livestock in California. The FDA possesses the authority to regulate drug products under Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, FFDCA, and they give the references. So cannabis and cannabis derivatives are not allowed for horses in California. That's public. It's on CDFA's website. I'll give you the link. You can go to the Q&A section and get many answers. I also have had direct conversations with California and the people in the top level people in the department, and there's really no wiggle room for this policy to carve out horses, because even though horses in the United States are not a human food chain animal, they are caught in the livestock net by the law in the state of California. So their concerns are basically the same as FDA, and there's really no wiggle room in their position at this time. NASC is doing safety studies along with some other companies on CBD, but we're not focusing on utility or efficacy as Hunter and Dr. Phillips are for hemp. So what do you watch out for? I would watch out for companies that mention a disease. If you're a consumer or purchase products on the other end of this webinar, I wouldn't buy from a company that mentions a disease. If you're a company that has disease statements or references, get them off, change them. Go to the FDA warning letters that were issued on November 25th, 2019. There were 15 warning letters issued. 13 of them had animal products involved. Look at those warning letters, and it's risk, and it makes the industry look bad. So if you're buying a product, ask if the company follows good manufacturing practice standards, and if so, which ones. CGMPs are a buzzword, and people will call me because following CGMPs are an NASC requirement, and they'll say, we follow CGMPs, and I say, which ones? Usually people don't know. So don't be afraid, it's trust but verify. Look at the claims, make sure that the analysis shows THC of less than 3%, and also hemp is a sponge plant, so it can suck up a lot of things from the environment. So microbial testing, heavy metals, pesticides are certainly concerns that we have, and we require testing for that. And look at how the company's products are verified, and look for independent verification, third-party verification. That could be an FDA audit or inspection. It could be other third-party audits or inspections. We're a third party. We do audits and inspections similar to an FDA inspection. So my message here is, at least on the product side, trust but verify. What are our greatest risks? FDA is going to have to find a solution for CBD and hemp. It's too popular. It's too much in demand on the consumer side. So they're not going to be able to get the toothpaste back in the tube or the genie back in the bottle. And there's a lot of organizations, including ours, Hunter, others, that are working on solutions, both the human and the animal side. Know your suppliers, and don't be afraid to ask questions and deal with quality suppliers. What do I think the greatest dangers are? Something unforeseen coming down the pike that causes us all to be painted with a broad brush. So if we have an event from an irresponsible company in the industry that wants to participate in the gold rush and make money, and we have death or injury to either human or animals, then that would give the regulatory agencies to take a position or shift their platform and opinion that they have a genuine safety concern, and they could come down heavy-handed. So because it's a broad brush, like it or not, you can have 95% of the people in an industry that try to do the right things, but isolated incidents can get attention of the regulatory agencies. I'll give you an example. Look at the melamine issue. It was relatively isolated in terms of the number of dogs that were affected in the United States. Now, I'm not minimizing that if it happened to you, it wasn't significant. It was, but in 85 million dogs in the United States, the number of animals that suffered catastrophic injury or death, or substantial injury or death, were relatively minor statistically. Look at the vaping thing on the human side. The entire industry is under high degree of scrutiny, and a lot of vape shops are being eliminated. So it doesn't take much to get attention. Here's some references. I'll make those available. They're all hot links. You can go in and look at anything that I've said here on the presentation, and to educate yourself more. Really, in the few minutes that I have, it's impossible to, and I don't want to communicate too much information to overwhelm you. I'll give you my contact information as well, and you can certainly email me or shoot me a note or give me a call if you have any questions. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Phillips. She is actually Canadian, hails from Toronto. She has a love of horses, and her science led her to study equine nutrition and exercise physiology, and she has a master's degree from the University of Kentucky and a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Guelph, who I happen to know a number of people up there, so great schools, both. Dr. Phillips is currently a professor of equine nutrition in the Department of Animal Science at North Carolina State University, and without further ado, please welcome Dr. Phillips.
Hi there. Can I just confirm that you guys can see my presentation and you can hear me?
I can.
Yes?
I can.
Okay, perfect. All right. So thank you for that introduction. And I have been able to see some of those questions that have been coming through. But now that I'm in my presentation, I can't see them anymore. But I did want to just make sure that everyone knows that I'm focusing on the feeds and the nutritional side of the hemp industry. And so when we think about what we're going to be feeding to our horses, really we're going to be feeding one of these four sort of forms of the product. And many times people might feed a combination of both, or they might feed for example, the hemp seed cake, which is really just the meal kind of formed into a cake-like patty. There are a few different ways that you can feed them, and depending on what form you're feeding, you're going to be getting potentially different nutritional benefits. And so you could feed the entire hemp seed. You could feed hemp seed meal, which is essentially the outer hull is removed and then everything is ground. You could be feeding solely the oil, or you could feed those hemp hulls themselves on their own. So if we talk about the hemp seeds, the entire thing, I've got this broken down. So I've got this pie chart to show you the major nutritional aspects of each of these different types of hemp products. And so with the entire seed, what you're getting is all of these very important nutrients. So we've got water. We can have 24% protein, 30% of that seed, the entire seed is going to be fat or oil. There's quite a bit of hull associated with that, so that's going to contribute to fiber. And then we have this other sort of non-fiber carbohydrate. And then we have ash, which is going to be mostly mineral components. And so when you feed the entire seed, you are getting the fiber from that outer hull, you're getting the oil that's still within it, you're getting everything that's within the germ of that seed, and so you're getting all of that protein as well. So then when we go forward and we are looking at the seed meal, this is after the oil primarily has been extracted and many of the hulls have been extracted. So this is after processing for other parts of the plant material, the seed material, and then what is left over. And so what this winds up doing is it winds up essentially, if you're comparing this to this, we're removing a large bit of the fat, we're removing some of that fiber, and we are increasing, simply because we're decreasing the volume, we are actually increasing the concentrations of some of the other components. So you'll see that the protein component of this hemp seed meal appears to be quite a bit bigger. Now, of course, if we were going from 1 whole kilogram of hemp seeds and then we process that for hemp seed meal, we might be down to only 700 grams. So we're talking about a smaller fraction of that total amount. And then if we look at the hemp seed oil, this is the extracted oil only. So suddenly we don't have any more water, there's no protein, there's no fiber, there are no minerals. All we have is the fat component. And I do want to make sure that this, we understand that this is different from the CBD oil or the filtrate that some people are going to be feeding. So this is hemp oil. And then we get into the hemp seed hulls. And so this is the fibrous portion, the external hull part of that seed, which when removed can be offered and fed as well. And so when we do remove just the hemp seed hulls, we're wind up with a mostly fibrous portion of this plant. It's about 54% fiber. We still retain a little bit of fat because even when you try to remove the hulls, there might be some cracked seeds that are going to be retained within this process. And so we are going to have still some fat. We're still going to have some protein. We'll still have some water, some ash, and then also this non-fiber carbohydrate. So when we are looking at our different feeds, depending on what type of product you're looking at, you're going to be getting various benefits. So for example, when you feed the entire seed, you're going to be able to get the benefits from all of the protein, fat, and fiber that's in that entire seed. If we are feeding the hemp seed meal, our biggest benefits are going to be from the protein because that's going to be the largest component of that entire ingredient. If we look at the oil, we're just going to be getting that fat benefit. And then if we're feeding the hemp hull, we're getting mostly a benefit from the fiber. Whoops, and sorry, that should have been fiber, fat, and protein. So excuse me for that typo there. It's going to be mostly fiber and then fat and protein. And so let's just talk briefly about what I actually mean by that. And I did want to address the one question that I saw. If we look at what nutrients are actually required by all species, we can categorize them in a few different ways, but of course all animals are going to require water. And then depending on sort of the way you think of it, all animals need energy or calories, but that's not really a nutrient, it's a quality of nutrient. And so animals can get calories from from carbohydrates, fat, and they can also get calories from protein. Within that area of carbohydrates, this is where it does get a little bit sticky because we do have our fibrous carbohydrates and then also our non-fiber carbohydrates like our starches and our sugars. And there's the question about fiber really being considered a nutritional component, and it is because it is a carbohydrate. And so in that regard, it would still be considered, if you were feeding fiber, even though it does benefit digestive health, you are actually feeding it as a carbohydrate. And in fact, animals can extract energy from fiber through the fermentation within the animals, whether it's a horse in particular. They have a large microbial environment where they can ferment the fiber to produce energetic substrates. But even humans do as well. We all know that if you eat too much cauliflower, you produce some gas, and that is a byproduct of fermentation. And the other byproduct, these volatile fatty acids, would actually have been absorbed for the human to use as well. So I just wanted to sort of stick that in there too. But we'll come back to fiber in a second. So let's talk about protein. So protein is basically a long chain of these components called amino acids. And when there are many different types of proteins. So in our food ingredients, there might be a type of protein, might be casein, for example, is a very common protein that's found in milk. And what that is it is just a really long chain of these things called amino acids. And so when we're eating protein, and our horses are eating protein, really we're just trying to supply the body with amino acids. And so this is a little bit different when we think about how we are feeding horses and even humans compared to ruminants, because when humans and horses consume their protein, that protein is going to be digested into these individual amino acids, and then those are going to be absorbed by the body, and then they can be used to build new protein. So you might drink some milk and get some milk protein, and you'll get all of these different amino acids. And then from those amino acids, you might be able to build insulin, or you might be able to build collagen or any other protein within the body. And so this is when we're talking about proteins for horses in particular, we're really worried about or concerned about these amino acids is we're really trying to focus on. And so when we're talking about nutritional quality for horses, if you're talking about your diet for a 500 kilogram horse that is essentially idle, mature, not really doing anything, they require 630 grams of protein. But really, what we're really worried about is making sure that that protein is actually providing the amino acids that the horse needs. And so this is because some of the amino acids can be built by the body itself. So we can actually, our horses can take various carbons and oxygen units and build them with the nitrogen component and build some of these amino acids. But there are some that are a little bit more complicated and they have to be provided for in the diet. And so that's where we consider these essential amino acids. It just means that they are essential to be in the diet because our body can't make them themselves. And so if we need to build a protein, we need to, within our body, we need to have all of those building blocks. And I always tell my students that amino acids are like letters of the alphabet. So we need, there are, 26 different letters. There are about 20 different amino acids. And so these are all different. And these essential amino acids are kind of like the vowels because they're really special. We don't get very far. We need to have them in our language so that we could put words together. And if we're missing any letters, we don't get very far. So for example, if we were missing the letter E from our computer keyboard, you would have a really hard time writing an essay. And so similar to that, lysine is considered one of the most important amino acids. And if we don't have enough lysine in our horse's diet, then they're not going to be able to do and to build all the proteins that they require. And so if you've got a horse that does particularly have higher demands, they're going to have higher requirements for lysine and some of these other ones, leucine, threonine, etc. Lysine is really the only one that's truly been identified as being what we consider limiting for the horse. Leucine, threonine, methionine are sort of the next ones coming down the chain that do appear to be not just required in high amounts, but perhaps limiting in some of the different feeds that we feed our horses. And so if we look at hemp and we look specifically at the protein that is within various hemp products, whether it's hemp seed meal or the whole hemp seed, obviously they're going to have different amounts of protein. So the total amount of protein, these would be on percentage basis. And so again, just to compare, so for example, let's say a pretty good quality Timothy hay might have 10% protein. An excellent quality alfalfa hay might have 18% total protein. And so obviously the hemp seed and the hemp seed meal have more protein percentage than, for example, the Timothy hay. The difference, of course, comes down to how much we're actually feeding. And so I always find that horse owners get very bent up on percentages of protein in a feed tag. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what the percentage is. It all depends on how much you feed of it. So for example, if you were to feed that 500 kilogram horse, he could easily eat about 10 kilograms of that Timothy hay, and he would be consuming 1,000 grams of protein. So, 1,000 grams is a kilogram times 10%. So he's going to be able to get in, 1 kilogram, he's going to be getting 100 grams of protein, but if he's eating 10 kilograms, then he's going to be getting 1,000 grams of protein, which very easily would meet his protein requirements at only 630 grams. And in fact, I'd say it's very true. I've very rarely done nutritional evaluations and found protein to be total protein to be limited. But what does potentially come into play is these essential amino acids. So for example, lysine being this sort of very important one, and threonine and methionine. And so this is where it becomes important to feed some horses higher qualities of protein. And so like I mentioned, alfalfa is a type of forage that's got higher amounts of protein. And it does, in fact, have a little bit more of these amino acids. But even if you are feeding young growing horses that have very high amino acid demands, you probably are looking at some kind of seed meal to just top up some of those amino acids. And so, for example, in many of our horse diets, soybean meal is the most common protein supplement that's added into most of our commercial feeds. And this is because it does have a very high amount of protein, and at 44%, and it's also highly concentrated in lysine and threonine and methionine, as well as many of the other amino acids. And so if we compare to, for example, hemp seed meal, we do see also a very high amount of protein, but it is a little bit lower in lysine, threonine, and it's a little bit higher in methionine in comparison to soybean meal. Now, whether or not that would meet your horse's lysine requirements would depend on how much of that hemp seed meal you're feeding, as well as the rest of the diet, and where you're also going to be getting additional protein perhaps into your horse's diet. But so hemp seed meal is a really great source of protein. It is comparable to soybean meal. It does have a little bit less lysine in particular than soybean meal, but it's still a really great source of it. And it's going to be a better source of lysine than any of your traditional forages. So it could be something that could be potentially included into grain mixes at some point once we really get through all of the testing and everything that we were discussing earlier. So let's talk about fat. So one of the biggest benefits for fat in a horse's diet is calories. So if we were to look at the number of calories in sugar, for example, sugar is going to provide 4 grams of, 4 calories per gram of sugar, whereas fat is going to provide 9 calories per gram. And so it's actually got 2.5 times the calories of carbohydrates. And so this can be really important for horses that have very high energy demands. So for example, our athletic animals. There can be times where they have such high energy demands that it might be difficult to feed them enough hay or even concentrated oats or commercial feeds, that you just can't feed them enough. They might not be able to eat enough safely to get the calories that they require. So for example, again, this 500 kilogram horse, sort of your typical 16-hand thoroughbred, if they're idle, they would only require 16.7 megacalories of energy. Meanwhile, our racehorse could require 35 megacalories. So certainly 2 times the amount of calories. And they might not be able to eat 20 kilograms of hay to get into those calories, and that might still not provide enough. And so fat is a really great calorie benefit for your horses. The other thing that fats can provide are the essential fatty acids. And so this kind of comes down a little bit into the biochemistry of a fat. But there are some fats, just like some proteins, like the amino acids. There are some fats, some of these fatty acid chains that the body cannot synthesize themselves. And so the body does have a requirement for 2 specific amino acids or fatty acids. One of them is called linoleic acid, and that's this 18 carbon chain. So here, this is carbon 1. All of these little dots here are the carbons, and going down to this 18. So it's an 18 carbon. And in this example, this is not it down here, but it's got 2 double bonds within it. And the first double bond is 6 places, 6 carbons from this, what we call the end chain or the omega chain. And that's the W is the lowercase sign for omega. So this is an omega-6 fatty acid. Our omega-3 fatty acids have that first double bond right here, as you can see here in this 3rd position. And the essential omega-3 fatty acid that we require is 18,3 or alpha-linolenic acid. And so these are not synthesized by our own bodies, and so they do have to be provided for in the diet. Now, in the horse, we don't actually know what this amount is, probably because it would be impossible to create a deficiency of these fatty acids, because they are in fact found in most things that horses consume, like pasture and pasture alternative, which is hay. Where we run into problems perhaps are when horses are consuming a lot of concentrates that might be higher in the omega-6 fatty acids, because ideally we want to limit the omega-6 fatty acids and potentially increase the more rare omega-3 fatty acids. And so ideally we have a ratio of 3 parts omega-6 fatty acid to 1 part omega-3. And many of our horse diets, especially if they are rich in a lot of concentrates, can wind up being sort of a 12-to-1 ratio instead. And so that's why we see a lot of horse owners wanting to increase the omega-3 content of their horse's diet, just so that we can bring that ratio up. And so if we look at the fats that are found within hemp oil, we can do this comparison with some of the other types of oils that we might consider feeding our horses or even ourselves. And so if we go over here and we look at canola oil, which is a fairly common fat source that we would give our horses, particularly if we are interested in increasing the calories in the horse's diet. And so what you can see is that we do have quite a few of these omega-6 fatty acids. We've got a few of these even 18-1, where there's only one saturation, one double bond there, and a relatively small amount of these omega-3 fatty acids. If we go over to another very popular option for horses in particular is flaxseed oil or linseed oil. It's the same thing. And here you can see very clearly that these do have a very good amount, a very high amount of these omega-3 fatty acids. And then when we look at hemp, we can see that there is a decent amount of omega-3 fatty acids in hemp. And they do still have some of these essential omega-3s and then a couple of these guys as well. Now, one of the interesting things about hemp is that we do have this additional fatty acid called gamma-linolenic acid. And so this is an 18-3, so it has one extra double bond, but it starts at that omega-6 position. And so this fat is a little bit different, and all of these fats kind of come into play when we're particularly curious about the inflammatory process. And I do want to sort of make sure that we realize if we're talking about, and let me go back here, fat from a nutritional standpoint provides calories and provides the essential fatty acids. All right, so from a nutritional standpoint, hemp seed oil does provide both linolenic and alpha-linoleic acid. One of the reasons why we're particularly interested in this balance of omega-3s to omega-6s has to do with the inflammatory pathways within our body. And this is a non-nutritional thing. This is coming into treating a disease such as arthritis or other inflammatory process. So what I'm going to just sort of talk about here is not a nutritional, not something that we would be getting hemp seed oil initially approved for. We're looking at it from the nutritional standpoint. But just because people are always so curious about the omega-3s, I did want to put this out here because this is important for hemp seed oil or linseed oil or whatever oils you're looking at. When we look at the omega-6s, here we've got this alpha-linolenic or linoleic, our 18-2, W6. And then this is where we have this gamma one coming in through here. And so this gamma linolenic acid, so it's kind of skipping a process of enzymes that we require. So it's kind of skipping in right down here from this hemp seed. All of these are going to continue on to this further category of this alpha-linolenic. And so these are the omega-6 versions. And one of the reasons why we kind of try to avoid having too many omega-6s is because when we get down in this process to this arachidonic acid, this can be a precursor to inflammatory proteins. So here we've got this up here. These are all the names of all these different actual compounds, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, etc. And the ones that are in red, these are inflammatory. So these would actually increase the inflammatory response, the pain, the increased blood flow that's associated with, things like arthritis, for example. Meanwhile, when we look over here, when we do have more of our omega-3s, and also coming down, if we can only stop it going into this pathway without this desaturase, we can get into producing these proteins that are less inflammatory and perhaps even anti-inflammatory. So that's where we really come into this interest of the omega-3s, is because they do not have any chance of going into this inflammatory process. They're really purely going into these here. All right, so let's then talk about the seed hulls. Again, these are really high in fiber, but they also retain some protein and oil. And so I really see these as being a solid alternative to some other feed ingredients like beet pulp or rice bran that some people feed as a high fiber type of feed that also provide some significant calories. And so when we look at hemp hulls, they certainly have more fiber within them than beet pulp, and then rice bran actually doesn't have as much fiber in it at all. It still retains a fairly high amount of protein, higher and even more so than rice bran. And then its fat content is moderate to rice bran. And so it would actually probably still have a decent amount of calories overall that the horse can extract and get digestible energy from. And so this might be a really nice ingredient to include for feeds that are trying to be higher in fiber and perhaps lower in the non-structural carbohydrates like our starches and sugars. Of course, there are other good things found within hemp, and now I'm kind of going back to the entire seed. I wasn't able to figure out or find sources of how these ingredients or how these other nutrients, these minerals and vitamins are retained when we go through to the meal versus the hull. Obviously, when with the oil, none of these are going to be included within it. It's really just the oil that is extracted. But when you do feed either certainly the entire seed, or if you're including the meal or perhaps the hulls, they probably do retain some of these. So magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, these are all major minerals that the horse requires. And then it also contains vitamin E, and then some of these are some of the B vitamins that the horse requires as well. So certainly it does have a lot of additional nutritional benefits for them. So in terms to sort of wrap this up, hemp is an excellent protein alternative to soybean meal, particularly if I know some horses are very sensitive to soybean meal. There are some people who are looking to avoid soybean meal because of the phytoestrogens, or if they are worried about GMOs, then hemp protein might be a good alternative. It does have that good value of that omega-6 to omega-3 ratio because it does have some good significant omega-3s. And then also that hulls and fiber component of it could be a really nice sort of fiber calorie supplement for some of our horses as well that might be lower in the sugars. From there, I just want to switch base. I hope many of you have already completed the survey. As of yesterday, I had 107 full responses. 56 of those were from the US, 42 were from Canada, and then I had a couple others from Mexico and Europe. Of these, 53% had used hemp products at some point in the past for their horses, and 40% were currently feeding some kind of hemp. And those were the ones that carried on and completed the rest of the survey. And so when we looked at what they're using, you might not be able to see this very well, but so this was hemp seed oil, hemp seed meal, hemp seed cake, hemp bedding, and then other, please specify. And this is where we really saw people specifically talking about the CBD. We hadn't really explored the use or included it as an option with the hulls or fiber. And then also some people were using the filtrate. And then when we asked about what benefits, we saw improved coat condition, 23%, 7% saw improved hoof condition, 21% had improved top line, 6% had improved immune benefits, including COPD and scratches, 17% had improved anti-inflammatory benefits, mostly regarding arthritis, 12% had improved performance, mostly due to the calming type of decreased anxiety, focusing benefits, likely probably from that CBD side of the answers. And then 5% had sort of other types of responses. So where to go from here? We do need to do some research in horses to look at how much we're feeding, how palatable it is, how safe it is, so that we can get them potentially included as ingredients and compare them to different feeds that might be available so we can really show the benefits of hemp. So with that, I know I've kind of talked too much, but this is my contact information if anybody has questions.
So much, Bill and Dr. Phillips, for those presentations. Caitlin and I were observing the questions that have been coming in, and so this is a great segue to connect why it is that we're having our webinar today, and why we went through the history of hemp, the regulatory process, and then really focused on the applications with horses. There's some great questions about how to prove safety and efficacy that are really relevant and related to the survey. So I wanted to start with those questions, and then we're going to have a little conversation about cannabinoids and seed products. Imagine that. But there are very clear guidelines that have been given to us by the FDA CVM as far as how to conduct clinical trials. And some of those to share with you are that we have to determine what the target species is and what the target category is. So for example, as Dr. Phillips mentioned, we're gonna feed a different formula and a different ration for the purpose of that specific animal. So again, if we have a performance horse, they're gonna need more calories than what a maintenance diet. So when we begin to determine what kind of clinical feed trial we're going to do, we take those things into consideration so that we can determine what the inclusion rate is. So that means how much of that particular ingredient is going to be fed to the animal. We then take that, and for the purposes of clinical research, we have an X formula that represents that inclusion rate. We then also use a 0.5X and then a 2X through the clinical trials in order to observe what the outcomes are in our animals. And that includes tests that generally look at skin as well as serum, urine, or blood samples is what I'm referring to as far as serum. And then we make sure that there's no toxicology events that are happening as the animal is fed the different inclusion rates. And it's also specific to the length of time of those trials, depending on what the category of the animal is. Now, and that's a brief overview. There's a lot more detail to that. But the reason that this particular webinar and the survey that we're working on is so critically important is because when we do a literature review looking at clinical feed trials and toxicology related to hemp fed to horses, guess how many actual published reports there are? 0. So because of that, there's no guidance for the FDA CVM to provide to us. And so Dr. Phillips and I basically decided that the only way to do this is to work backwards and to develop a baseline. And that was how the survey was born. The survey also invites folks that are feeding or are interested in feeding hemp to contact Dr. Phillips so that we can initiate some of these samples so that we can determine what we need to measure as far as anti-nutritives and safety events. Once we begin to be able to conduct the clinical feed trials, that data is going to be compiled. And again, we'll put that in front of the FDA CVM for pre-approval. So that's why that survey is so important, so that we can start data gathering. Dr. Phillips, do you want to add anything to that?
No. I guess I just wanted to, I saw this question about ruminants. I think that was when I was talking about the protein, and I realized I just didn't touch on that. I just wanted to mention it really quickly. So ruminants, because they have the microbes in their forestomach, those microbes actually produce a whole lot of amino acids as they're themselves regenerating. And so ruminants actually have different amino acid requirements because they don't necessarily need the amino acids to be provided for in the diet. They just need nitrogen so that their microbial protein can make all of those amino acids, and then they're digested and absorbed in the lower part of the small intestine. So sorry about not doing that.
Hunter, if I could interject, I have another call in 5 minutes. So if there's any questions for me, I only have 5 minutes. I did scroll through the questions and I saw one that I think we addressed, but just to emphasize, the question says, I guess it's a statement. And hemp and the hemp seed, don't forget that all hemp seed derived products have grass status. That's not true for animals. So again, in the presentation, as I said, grass for humans does not mean grass for animals. And for something to be generally recognized as safe for animals, it has to be species specific. Okay.
Definitely. And one more bit of information to add that really kind of pulls this all together is when we're talking about the target species and those categories of animals, we also have to do different quantifications of the nutritional value. And fiber is a great indicator of how specific that is. When we're talking about ruminants report their fiber and the way that they use it in a very different way than do horses and chickens. So for example, for applications for monogastrics, we want to look at more of a human dietary comparison, which is soluble and insoluble, where ruminants are going to want to look at acid and neutral detergent fibers. So again, it's very specific to the target animals. And circling back, every single ingredient application starts with the definition of the ingredient and then adds the safety and efficacy of the target species to that approved ingredient. So what this looks like is we're going to get meal and cake approved as an ingredient starting with chickens, but then we have to go through every potential species that would benefit from being fed hemp seed meal and cake to show it's safe and effective for use on that target species for that category. This is a very long process, but it's that level of detail that we have to provide to the FDA CVM to show that safety and efficacy. And one other thing that I want to address quickly, and if I can get some feedback from you too, Bill, there's a lot of questions about cannabinoids. I really want to take a second and talk about this. Cannabinoids, again, are considered to be contaminant when it comes to grain and grain byproducts because of the very small amounts that we find in grain and grain byproducts. So a lot of pesticides or heavy minerals are measured at a concentration of below 50 or below 40 parts per million in order to be considered safe. And the definitions that the Veterinary Health Products Association uses is total cannabinoids. So that's not just CBD. That's one molecular component of all the cannabinoids. That's cannabidiol specifically. So all the total cannabinoids measure under 40 parts per million with that veterinary health products regulation in Canada. And that's what we're going to be meeting here in the United States, is at a minimum of below 50 parts per million, if not matching that 40 parts per million. So cannabinoids are not the primary benefit when we look at grain and grain products. And I think that's important to note that that's the real difference between a nutrient component and a supplement component. And Bill's the one with our 28 years of experience working together that really helped me to understand the difference between a nutritional component and a structured function. Bill, do you have anything that you want to add in your few minutes left?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to, contribute. I'd like to thank you not only for putting this together, but also the work that you're doing, as well as Dr. Phillips and the other associates involved. So, it's a long process. It is an onerous process. I get it. I really appreciate the work that you do, and glad to help in any way that we can.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for being here this whole time. And thanks, Dr. Phillips, for really being an incredible asset and just a real partner in this venture. I think it's always that moment where you take a deep breath and you wonder if you've just overwhelmed everybody or made them terrified that this process is never going to be completed. But we are really working hard to begin to have multiple applications going through the approval process. And the horse industry has been a great early adopter. So I'm waiting to see if there's any other questions, but I did want to take this opportunity again to ask everyone to complete the survey That information is critical to us being able to develop the methods and protocols. And by us, I mean Dr. Phillips is doing the lion's share of that work. I'm very supportive, but we really, really need that data to help us develop a baseline. And that also includes people willing to share that survey with others in the industry, not just people that are currently feeding hemp, but also folks that are interested or maybe even fearful, finding out why that is. And then also identifying folks that are willing to help us in this research process by sharing samples of their healthy horses or their horses that are being fed hemp products. So please do share this sample far and wide with all of your horsey friends. Specifically, that's our target. The other thing I want to mention is that we are considering conducting another webinar to specifically talk about the California regulation of hemp and how it affects horses because they're considered livestock. So it would be really wonderful to see in our stream if you guys are interested in that webinar so that we can schedule it and move forward on that. Any other questions in our last few minutes, guys?
Well, I think we were able to address most of the questions that were asked on Facebook. You know, as the presentations were going on. I guess from my standpoint, I'm just going to ask this question, ask this question in general for the folks who are coming to the Hemp Feed Coalition Facebook page to watch this video, and really see what you guys are about. If you had 15 seconds, let's say, to explain what the horse owners who are watching this presentation, who are not scientists and not necessarily hugely involved in the hemp industry, if you had to sum up what we could do to help you guys in 15 seconds, how would you go about that?
Sorry, Hunter. My other call's here, so you guys take care. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, you guys. I'm just wanting to share my appreciation while we wait to see if we can get some feedback from you about how we can help or what other information you're looking at. I am so excited to see all the comments and for all of you to join us today. It's always nerve-wracking to host your very first live session. Obviously, I'm really great at this, and it took me a second to get everything working properly at the very beginning. But I can't express to you how important your feedback and your engagement is with the work that we're doing. And I think Dr. Phillips would probably second that pretty readily. Is there anything that you would like to share, Dr. Phillips, before we go?
I don't think so. I'm just always, if there are ever any other questions about nutrition and stuff, anybody can reach out.
Excellent. And our contact information is up there for you, as well as the link for that survey. So again, thank you so much for everyone's participation and joining us today.